I'm Chloe. Standing under the blinding lights of the VIP gala, I watched the local sheriff escort my uncle and cousin out the doors. My mud-stained hands weren't shaking and my chest wasn't tight. Hundreds of guests stared at me, looking at me like some heartless monster who just destroyed her own family. But I felt absolutely zero guilt. It was as if a massive weight had finally been lifted off my shoulders and I reclaimed my life. Let me take you back to how it all started. My aunt passed away and left her historic vineyard in Napa Valley in a structured trust, naming me the legal managing beneficiary. I took that responsibility seriously. Every day, I wore my mud-stained boots and work gear, driving a beat-up pickup truck around the estate. I worked myself to the bone just to keep those vines alive. My Uncle Robert and my cousin Leo, on the other hand, chose a very different lifestyle. Robert was always dressed in tailored suits, desperate to turn our traditional farm into a lavish resort club just to show off to the elite. Leo branded himself as the creative director, constantly blowing money on helicopter rides and rented supercars just for his social media pictures. They treated the vineyard like an endless ATM to fund their wealthy facade. The tension was always there. To them, I wasn't the owner. I was just a rustic hired hand, working quietly while they comfortably spent the money I sweat for. A lot of relatives whispered when my aunt chose me over Robert, her own brother. But my aunt wasn't foolish. I still remember a summer afternoon when she looked at me and said, "Chloe, I'd sweat money is to build a solid foundation for when the storm hits, not to plate the roof in gold for the neighbors to see." She saw the fatal flaw in Robert's character long before anyone else, a man so desperate for admiration that he would gladly borrow against his future to pay for his present. She didn't hand the vineyard to me because I was the smartest, but because she knew I was the only one in the family who dared to say the word no. She locked strict financial boundaries into the legal paperwork because she understood the reality. If she gave Robert total control, this entire legacy would burst like a bubble after one night of fake glory. My real responsibility wasn't to make this family richer, but to stop them from destroying themselves out of greed. Unfortunately, my uncle treated that protection like a personal insult. A few weeks later, the tension finally reached its breaking point. Robert called me into his office. The desk was covered with blueprints and thick loan documents. He wanted me to sign a massive mortgage agreement, using our oldest, most valuable vineyard as collateral. His plan was to fund a luxury resort and spa right on the property. He started with a tone that sounded like a life lesson, insisting that family members must elevate each other. He talked about our legacy, claiming that we needed this resort to secure our place among the Napa elite. Then, his tone sharpened. He pointed out the window at my beat-up pickup truck. He told me it was a complete disgrace, an eyesore that was ruining the farm's prestigious image. He said I was embarrassing the family. But looking at him, sitting in his expensive tailored suit, drowning in invisible debt, I realized something important. His contempt didn't come from a place of true wealth. It came from status anxiety. People who rely on massive loans to maintain a wealthy facade live in constant fear of being exposed. My old, paid-off truck, and my quiet, debt-free life, they were a glaring mirror reflecting his own hollow reality. He didn't just hate my truck, he hated what it represented. He wanted me to sign that mortgage so I would become complicit in his delusion. If I was drowning in debt too, his fake lifestyle would finally feel justified. I didn't argue, and I didn't defend my choices. I simply looked at the contract, then calmly told him that I needed time to review the documents before signing anything. He let out a frustrated sigh, thinking I was just being stubborn and incompetent. But he had no idea. I was already calculating my exact next move. Later that evening, I sneaked into Robert's office to find the original loan contract. The room smelled of expensive leather and cigars. I started looking through the papers on his desk. Under a stack of blueprints, I found a glossy brochure for the upcoming VIP gala. It boldly celebrated Leo as the visionary founder of the vineyard, listing all the important guests. I scanned the list. My name was completely crossed out. They had erased me from my own property to avoid any embarrassment, but that wasn't the worst part. At the bottom of the drawer, I found a hidden agreement. It wasn't just a loan for a resort. Robert had been secretly negotiating to sell the entire wine brand to a foreign conglomerate, just to pay off the massive gambling debts he and Leo had racked up. Holding that glossy invitation and the secret contract in my hands, I stood silently in the middle of his office for a very long time. I didn't scream, and I didn't cry. But deep inside, I heard the shattering of a naive belief I had tried to protect for years. You know what the worst part of betrayal is? It isn't the lie itself. It's realizing that to your own blood relatives, your entire existence is worth less than their image to a room full of passing guests. I had quietly carried their financial burdens, restructured their risky debts, and worked myself to exhaustion just to keep this family facade intact. But to them, my existence and my old truck were nothing but a stain on their perfect picture. In that silent room, I realized I was never a niece or a family member to them. I was just a wallet, a convenient tool for collateral. My quiet sacrifice hadn't bought their love. It had only fed their cruelty. I put the papers down on the desk, smoothing out the edges. At that exact second, any weakness or guilt I had left inside me died completely. I picked up my phone, but I didn't call Robert. I called my lawyer, Toi Hyo. Shingui ban loi thawai tieng ant theo jung yeo kao, kong kem bat kigiai teach now. Instead of screaming or fighting behind closed doors, I chose the exact night of the VIP gala to make my move. The estate was lit up, filled with hundreds of wealthy guests, investors, and local politicians. Robert was standing near the entrance, a glass of our finest wine in his hand, laughing and playing the role of the successful owner. Then, I walked through the main doors. I wasn't alone. I walked in accompanied by the local sheriff and my trust attorney. The music stopped. The room went completely silent. I walked straight up to Robert and placed 2 documents on the cocktail table in front of him. The first was an immediate revocation of his land use privileges. The second was a legal cease and desist order, freezing all company assets and credit lines. Robert's face went pale. He tried to laugh it off as a misunderstanding, but the sheriff stepped forward, confirming the orders were active. That's when Aunt Martha rushed over. She was crying, grabbing my arm, begging me to stop. She pleaded with me to handle this quietly, saying that family shouldn't air their dirty laundry in public, that I was embarrassing all of us. But I looked at her tears. Nan and I felt absolutely nothing. In a toxic family, we often focus our anger on the ones causing the direct damage, the narcissists like Robert. But we forget how dangerous the enablers are. Psychology tells us that people who play the peacemaker, who beg you to just let it go for the sake of the family, aren't actually protecting the peace. They are protecting their own comfort. Martha watched me work myself to exhaustion. She watched Robert belittle me, and she said nothing. But the moment her luxurious lifestyle was threatened, she suddenly cared about family. She was perfectly willing to offer me up as a sacrifice just to keep her comfortable bubble intact. I didn't answer her. I just gently pulled my arm away from her grip. The lawyer handed Robert a copy of the hidden sale agreement I found in his desk. The investors standing nearby saw it. The whispers started immediately. I turned around and walked out of the gala, leaving them trapped in the exact nightmare they had built for themselves. The consequences followed quickly, unfolding exactly as the legal documents dictated. With the cease and desist order in full effect, Robert's illusion of power vanished completely. The wealthy investors who witnessed the confrontation at the gala didn't wait around. They backed out of the resort project that very night, cutting all ties. By the next morning, the ripple effects hit Leo. A tow truck arrived and hauled his rented supercar right out of the estate driveway. The leasing company had tried to run the farm's corporate card, but every single line of credit was officially locked. Aunt Martha finally lost the comfort of pretending everything was fine. When the freeze triggered a full financial audit, the massive gambling debts Robert had been hiding were exposed for everyone to see. The bank sent immediate delinquency notices. She collapsed under the weight of the reality she had spent years trying to ignore. I didn't intervene. I didn't answer their calls, and I didn't offer to negotiate. I simply stood back and watched the consequences of their actions catch up to them. I honored the legal boundaries I had set to protect my aunt's legacy. I didn't throw them a single lifeline. I let the fall teach them the lesson they refused to learn. When you hear this story, you might think to yourself, She only did it because she had the legal power. You might think, I don't have an estate. I have absolutely nothing to use against my own family. But you would be wrong. My greatest weapon that night wasn't the lawyer's folder, and it wasn't the power to freeze their assets. It was my absolute willingness to walk away. Manipulators only have power when you are terrified of losing the relationship. When my family tried to use loyalty to threaten me, they assumed my deep desire to belong would make me back down. Whether you hold a multi-million-dollar deed or just empty pockets, an iron boundary always starts in your mind. It is the exact moment you accept that stepping into lonely freedom is far better than rotting inside a home built on exploitation. The most valuable asset you have to set a boundary with a toxic family isn't your bank account. It is your presence, your energy, and your care. If they refuse to respect you, you strip them of the privilege of having you in their life. That is the absolute harshest sentence you can hand down. And it doesn't require a single courtroom. Stop sacrificing yourself to fund the people who drain your spirit. Family can be a beautiful gift, but access to your life is a privilege they have to earn.